Well, welcome here. I'm going to minimize the speaking. How about that? So I can't see anybody, so feel free to make faces at me. Um, it's 3 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining our N of One series. This is part 2, and this one is entitled Leadership Perspectives on Managing Family Responsibilities and Career. I want to give a special shout out to AWEM for sponsoring this didactic session. This will be 50 minutes and it's worth 0.75 credits. I'd like to introduce, first I should tell you who I am. I'm Hannah Mishkin from Reading Hospital in West Reading, PA. And we have a wonderful panel of speakers today. I'm going to start in alphabetical order. We have Michelle Lal from Emory University. We have Dr. Lexi Mannix from the University of Florida at Jacksonville. Dr. Kat Ogle from George Washington University of Medicine and Health Sciences, Dr. Melissa Parsons from the University of Florida at Jacksonville, Dr. Neha Rauker from the Mayo Clinic, and Leah Stevens from Reading Hospital Tower Health, who works here with me as well. All an amazing panel of women, so you guys are in for a treat. We have no disclosures. Before I tell you about what our objectives are today, the title N of One, I feel like I have to explain. I guess it was 2 years ago now. We did the first of the two-part series, N of One, the best time to start a family in your career. And the N of One denotes the concept of that there's no perfect time. It's different for everybody. So last time we talked about what are the challenges and the benefits of choosing when to start a family and manage a family. And so the objectives for today's talk are the leadership perspectives to help you manage that. And the specific objectives are we're going to identify policies that can be utilized for family needs. We're going to discuss ways to leverage policies and resources to support families of emergency medicine physicians. And we're going to broaden the concept of what family responsibilities are to be more inclusive, i.e., it's not just for mothers and children. So as you can see, we have a panel of several speakers, and the way this is going to work is each of the speakers is going to have about 5 to 10 minutes to speak on their topic. And the entire didactic is broken down into sort of concepts of policies and leave. Then we're going to talk about sort of early career and adjustments. And then we're going to end with this broader concept of inclusiveness of family needs and leave. I am going to ask that you hold your questions till the end, or please put them in the chat. We have fantastic moderators who are going to help us at the end go through those questions. And that'll help us maintain everybody on schedule. So we're going to start with policies and leave. And again, I'm Hannah Mishkin, and Leah Stevens is going to help me present this section. And so policies and leave is a pretty boring topic. So I'm going to give you a case and we'll go from there. So a PGY2 presents to your office and she says she just found out she's pregnant and she has some requests for how to manage her time. She said she'd like to take the maximum time off without extending her residency so she can care for her little one. She says she's willing to work every day until her delivery to accrue as much time as possible so she can maximize her time off. She said she'd like to get paid for all of this time off. And then she also says, when I come back, I'd like to have some lighter rotations, because she's thinking ahead and realizing that things might be a little challenging. And so I didn't mention I'm a relatively new program director. And so when a resident presents to me with something that's related to policy or there's some concern, I go to the smartest person in our department, and that's our program manager, Leah Stevens. So I'm going to go to Leah. Leah, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Hi, Leah. I have a question for you. I have a resident who found out she's pregnant and she wants to take as much time off as possible without extending her residency. How much time do you think she can take off?
Well, before we dive into the policies, regulations, and requirements, I'd like to take a moment to stress the importance of open communication. Communication is really key in having a successful leave. your administrators and your colleagues aren't going to know how to help you or if they can help you without some form of communication. You don't have to give details, but you must communicate. So now that our resident has communicated with us, we will review the policies and requirements that are going to impact our discussion and her decision. And as the residency program manager, these are the four key policies and requirements that I use. The Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education, the ACGME, ABEM, the American Board of Emergency Medicine, FMLA, the Family Medical Leave Act, and my institutional policies. And these four areas are going to dictate the boundaries for time off and the curriculum requirements for our residents. And since most of these requirements are based on a 52-week period, we are going to look at how they correspond with that time frame. So our first requirement, our first question that our resident had was, how much time can she take off without extending her residency? For this, we're going to look at the ABEM policy. And ABEM regulates the minimum amount of time of training required to become proficient in a specialty. The ABEM policy states that a resident must complete at least 46 weeks at each training level. And most recently, ABEM has updated their policy to include an additional 2 weeks of time off for parental, caregiver, or personal medical leave. And please note, this additional 2 weeks is at the program director's discretion. So with the additional 2 weeks, the resident must work 44 weeks at each training level. This means that our resident can take up to 8 weeks off for family medical leave without extending her residency.
Oh, Leah, thanks. And here's the policy. I guess this is the new policy. Thank you for updating me on that. So I'll go back and talk to our resident that she needs to work at least 44 weeks since she's in pretty good standing, and I would approve that. But you know, Leah, she said she's willing to work extra time up until the time she takes off to accrue as much time as possible. Can she do that?
No, the resident cannot work every day until she delivers. And for this one, we're going to consult the ACGME requirements, which tells us the maximum hours a resident can work. The ACGME requirement states that a resident cannot work more than 80 hours averaged over a 4-week period, and they must have 1 day off in 7. And specifically for the emergency department, a resident cannot be scheduled for more than 60 hours. Plus, I wouldn't recommend working continuously to anybody. It'll just lead to burnout.
You know what, Leah, you're right. I thought that, but I'm glad that you confirmed that. So she can take 8 weeks off, and we're not going to recommend that she work every day because ACGME says she can't really do that, and it's probably going to burn her out. Can she get paid for the time that she's off? And if so, how does that work?
So yes, she can get paid. And for this, we're going to consult our institutional policies, because your institutional and HR policies are going to dictate the pay practices. For us, our residents and employees can use their vacation and sick time to get paid during a leave. Additionally, you can also look into short-term disability to supplement your income during that time off. That's typically at an additional cost. But specifically for our institution and our second-year resident, each upper year resident gets 20 vacation days plus 10 sick days, which equals 30 days, and that equates to about 6 weeks of paid leave.
Okay, so she can take 8 weeks off, but at our institution, looks like they get 6 weeks paid. So those 2 weeks would be unpaid. Something for her to think about.
Yes. Well, and for our resident's last question, she wants to return to work with a lighter rotation schedule for as long as possible. For this question, I'm going to have to defer back to you, Dr. Mishkin, because as the program director, it's at your discretion to change her rotation schedule.
Well, let me think about this. So if she wants to have a light rotation when she comes back, ABEM says that she has to work, I think you said 46 weeks every PGY year, but we have the discretion for 44 weeks. So she's going to come back her senior year. She needs to work 44 weeks total. And 30 of those weeks, according to ABEM, have to be emergency medicine or peds emergency medicine. So that's about 7.5 blocks for us because we're 4-week blocks. That leaves us about 3.5 blocks or about 14 weeks where we can kind of cushion her schedule. I think we can accommodate that. I will have to go back and look at her entire block schedule and make sure that she's meeting the ACGME requirements, which are ACGME says she needs 4 blocks of critical care, at least 2 of which need to be over the PGY 2 level, PGY 2 or greater, and she needs to have 20% peds, but I'm pretty sure that we've met that. So yeah, I think we have some answers. You know what, Leah, I have one last question. Let's say this resident, well, how much time does FMLA give her if she says, hey, Dr. Mishkin, I want to extend my residency. I need a little more time.
So for residents who are willing to extend their residency and maximize their time off, we consult the Family Medical Leave Act. And since our resident is a second-year resident, she meets the eligibility criteria for FMLA. The criteria is that she must work at least 12 months for the employer. And of those 12 months, she has to work around 1,200 hours to be eligible for a 12-week of unpaid job protected leave for family or medical leave of absence, which means she must work 40 weeks out of the 52 weeks. So what does this look like when we compare FMLA to the ABEM requirements for the work weeks? So FMLA states she gets 12 weeks of protected time off, which puts her at having to work 40 weeks. ABEM says she has to work 44 weeks out of the 52-week period. So our resident would have to extend her residency for 4 weeks to maximize her FMLA benefits, which would be my recommendation to her. So to summarize for this resident, what she can do, she can have 6 weeks of paid time off, 8 weeks of time off without extending her residency, and 12 weeks off with an extension.
Wow, that's a lot of information. I'm so glad that I came and talked to you about that, Leah.
And here is the FMLA poster from their website. It's a really great snapshot of the eligibility and the benefits that the Act provides to employees.
All righty, so let me make sure I got everything straight. So in summary, ABEM says that our residents need to work 46 weeks per PGY year, but they just came out with a new parental policy that says the PD can give residents in good standing an extra 2 weeks off. That comes out to 8 weeks total. And if they want to get paid at our institution, that's 6 to 8 weeks. So it depends on what they want there. But FMLA, that's the Federal Medical Leave Act, says that your job is protected if you want to take up to 12 weeks off per year. And if when we get paid on leave, or when somebody wants to get paid on leave, that really depends on the individual institution, because FMLA doesn't designate pay, they just protect your job. And ACGME has certain requirements for duty hours and the curriculum that we have to take into consideration when we give our residents time off. Does that sound about right, Leah?
Yes.
All right. I'm so glad I leaned on you for that. Thank you. And the summary of all this is, sounds like we're going to have to do a lot of planning with this resident because everything's a little bit different for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Well, thank you. Well, we talked about what to do and how to maximize our time off and not extend residency, but sometimes we do need to extend residency and have super seniors. And so for that discussion, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Michelle Law.
Thanks, Dr. Mishkin. So what is a super senior? So I'm sure some of you may have figured that out by now, but that's going to be a resident who chooses they want to spend more time at home with their newborn so that they then have to extend residency. So as Leah so eloquently described to us, if you want to take that full 12 weeks of FMLA, you're going to owe 4 weeks of residency training. But what are the advantages to being a super senior? Well, I mean, number one, the extension is at the end of your residency, right? So you're nearly completely trained, you're confident, you know what you're doing. Those shifts are easy, right? Far easier than if they came before residency. And it's so important to spend time with your newborn. So, I think we're all right. We are type A people. Most of us, we've been driven, we've been on this path, and you just don't want to go any longer than you have to. But if you think about 4 weeks in the spectrum of all the time that you spent in undergraduate, maybe graduate school or a job before medical school, and then residency, it's nothing. It's a drop in the bucket. So I always talk to my residents about whether or not it's something first that they could afford, because that would be unpaid time. But if they can, to really consider spending that time bonding with their baby. I think anybody that you know that's a parent, an aunt, whatever, they will tell you that kids grow so fast, and it's true. So time you don't want to miss. What are the disadvantages? Really, there's only two, and it's your staggered graduation date. I know when we've done this in our residency program, our super seniors go graduation with all of their peers, and it's really a formality that they come back, finish those last couple weeks, and then get signed off. And maybe it's a staggered start for jobs, but I don't know about you guys and how you're feeling if you're a resident or if you're a faculty member. When most of us switch jobs or start a new job, it's kind of nice to take a break. So a lot of people, even if they finished, on time, June 30th, still don't want to start until sometime in August, maybe even September. So again, I don't think it's a big deal. And I don't think employers are going, uh-oh, this is somebody who wants a late start. So the other thing to consider is if you haven't had a child during residency, well, maybe you want to have a child as a new faculty member. And I did this. I moved, and I was a brand new attending. I moved to a new state. I had a new job title, a new job location, and I kind of get there, and I'm there a couple months. I take my boards, and then I'm pregnant. I go to the head of my group, and I say, "Oh, I'm going to have a baby," and he's like, "Oh, God, we haven't had anyone do that in about 10 years." And I think, "Oh my gosh, what am I walking into?" Right? And the plan wasn't very well laid out, and it wasn't very well explained, but that's okay. We got through it. But it was really challenging to try to figure out this balance of responsibilities at work and at home. And when I was about 5 months pregnant, I was offered a job as a clerkship site director. And I really wanted to take it. I knew I wanted to work in graduate medical education. This was sort of a bridge in through UME, and I wanted to get more involved. But I was like, God, who's going to cover my maternity leave? Like, what's going to happen when I'm not at work? But fortunately, through the work of some mentors, I decided to go ahead and take the job. And they were able to find a previous person who had done the job to do the 3 orientations that I missed. And it was not a big deal. But this was trying to figure out that balance. When can I say yes? And when should I say no? And this is a hard balance for all of us. And I think it takes years to get it right. And it's easier to do once you're more senior, right? So when you're junior, you certainly don't want to say no to an opportunity that potentially opens doors for what you think might be your path. But it is absolutely okay to say no if you don't have the time, the bandwidth, or whatever it might be, right? You say no with grace and thanks, that you were offered this position, but I promise more positions will come. Can we go to the next slide, please? Whoa. I think there's one more back. Yeah. So remember that this applies to all primary caregivers. So really, if we want to destigmatize parental leave or even family leave, it has to always be called family leave. We should have policies that apply to fathers and not just mothers, adoptive parents, surrogates, whatever the situation is. Family leave should apply in all these cases. And I know we have another speaker who's going to talk more about that. I think the other thing is, don't apologize for the needs of your family. So if you need to step away from the clinical department because you're going to pump breast milk for your child, do that. Don't apologize for it. I guarantee everybody listening to this right now, if a colleague was like, hey, I have to step out for 15 minutes to make a phone call, you'd be like, oh, sure, no problem. I can cover you. So don't apologize for doing a biological function that feeds your child, right? No apologies. Set restrictions on meeting times. This is absolutely okay. And I think we have all felt the creep from this during COVID, because now that things are virtual, oh, well, you can just get on your computer or your phone real fast. Well, maybe you can, but maybe you can't. And it's okay to say, I'm sorry, I can't meet after 5 o'clock. So, and my kids are a little bit older now, but they, several years ago, it was, well, mom, you're still doing work. You're still on the phone. And so I religiously unplug myself. If somebody really needs me, they can make a phone call. And the balancing act is ever present, but it will change and it shifts. And I think part of the hardest thing as a parent is once you feel like you've got it down, something changes and you have to start all over. So don't get frustrated. That's just part of life. But it's okay to set boundaries and find your support system. Find the people who are going to help you through this. So let's talk about boundaries. So unplug for family time every day. If I'm not at work, we try to eat dinner every day as a family around 6:30. There's no electronics at the table, the TV's never on, and we just talk to each other. So find this time to connect. And I know we work bizarre schedules, so it might not always be dinner, but maybe it's breakfast before school. Say no to meetings that are outside of business hours or that intrude on your family's obligations. That is okay. We also, there were people who had all these jobs, right, 30 years ago that had no cell phones, no email, like no nothing. So it's absolutely okay to say no. And then outsource. So I outsource just about everything that I can. I outsource my childcare, laundry, house cleaning, meal preparation, yard work, pet care, everything, right? Think about how much you get paid per hour to do your job. And then think about how much these things cost. So I would rather work one extra shift every month to pay for all these things than not have this help, because I don't want to spend my off time taking care of these tasks. And then scheduling. I know Dr. Rauker is going to talk about this a little bit more, but make the requests as you need them. It is absolutely okay to request off a morning to go to a preschool musical, right? Or preschool program or whatever it might be. Use your requests as you need them so that you can spend that quality time with your family. So my big take home points, it is okay to say no. Other opportunities will come. And don't let anyone tell you whether or not you have the bandwidth to take on something new. That is something you have to decide for yourself. And it is okay to say, gosh, this is something I'm so interested in, but unfortunately, I just don't have the bandwidth to take it on and do it well right now. Because you set yourself up for failure if you're like, oh, I can't really do it. And you kind of get forced into it and then you don't do it well because you didn't have the time to commit to it. Don't apologize and advocate for yourself. So this again is where mentorship is super important. Find a mentor who can help you know how to advocate for yourself.
Hannah, you're muted.
Thank you. That was great advice. So next we have Dr. Kat Ogle, who's going to talk to us about moving from residency to fellowship.
So I started the middle of my chief year by having my son. And I found out that I was pregnant in the same week that I found out that I was chief. So for me, that was really helpful for scheduling because I could make my senior schedule, and I set it up so that I was able to do all of my vacation and a research block together. So I had a total of 8 weeks off in a row off. I was doing research, which really was keeping my child alive. But for me, I 100% did not want to delay graduation. I wanted to move right into my fellowship. I wanted to do an ultrasound fellowship, and I wanted to sort of get the ball rolling. Could you go to the next slide, please? By the time my son was 1 year old, my ex-husband and I were separated. And so I was in the middle of fellowship. I was getting a divorce, and I was managing all of the childcare responsibilities that we needed to do while doing all of that. And so when it comes to sort of thinking about the infrastructures that are in place in your organization, all of my family is out on the West Coast, so that we didn't have any family close by. I had friends, which is great. But what's very interesting about moving into attendinghood is particularly when you can find opportunities for leadership, sometimes those leadership opportunities decrease your clinical time and it increases some flexibility in your schedule so that you can actually do some things from home. And so don't push away the idea of taking on a leadership role of any kind in your department because it might make it harder to be a parent. I have actually found that those leadership opportunities have made it easier for me to be a parent because I get to be more selective about my schedule. Could you go to the next slide, please? Now, in all of the time that my son was preschool, that was probably the most onerous as far as arranging for childcare. And, because you have to think about not only your childcare for your overnight shifts and your evening shifts, but you also have to think about sleeping the next day. Yes, we've all done it. We've all pushed through and done post nights and managed childcare and walked around like complete and total zombies. But there's a reason that like the sleep deprivation of early, parentage is limited because you're going to go crazy otherwise. So you're going to lose your mind otherwise. And so it would have been helpful to have a concept like on scene or on-site childcare or some other system in the department to support my ability to arrange for childcare. Because it was like nanny.com and care.com and interviews and going through nannies over and over again because they would show up 15 minutes late. I'm like, you can't be 15 minutes late. I can't be 15 minutes late. I have to go to the hospital. And like having to fire a 22-year-old who is your sole care provider for your child when you're not at work, that really sucks. Could you go to the next slide, please? One of the things that has been a tremendous joy for me is sharing my love of medicine and sharing my love of being a teacher with my son. He teaches my medical students as often as I do, almost. He comes and teaches ultrasound with me. He has totally Zoom bombed all of my Zoom education throughout the entire pandemic. All of my students know who he is. He's like, "Mommy, am I famous?" I'm like, "Yes, you're famous." And so speaking of famous, if you could go to the next slide. I think the other thing that is important is as you think about this transition from fellowship into early attendinghood and you think about leadership opportunities, the more protected time you have, the more opportunities you have to provide really cool experiences for your kids. So the picture on the left is Hawaii. So I took my kid to Hawaii when he was 6 years old. I didn't ever have that as a kid. And it's so awesome for me to be able to share that with him. And then the picture on the right is from a bit on NBC that I did talking about being a mom on the front lines. And they asked for some pictures. And of course, he saw this and he lost his mind. He's like, "Mommy, I'm on the TV." Yeah, I'm like, "Yes, you're famous." That's really what his goal is. If you could go to the next slide, please. So for me, most of my challenges with being a parent in the transition from residency to fellowship to being an early attending was childcare, and then breastfeeding. And so I want to talk a little bit about breastfeeding. If you can go to the next slide. So we know that women are making up more than 50% of matriculants to medical school. However, if you look at the data, less than a third of mothers are actually able to get to their goal of breastfeeding. Okay, so what is it that gets in the way? Could you go to the next slide, please? It is time, it is awkward scheduling, and it is space. I can count on both hands and both feet how many times I was told to pump in the bathroom when I was a resident. And I can also count on both my hands how many times I actually did that because there was not another safe place for me to do it or not another private place for me to do it. And that's just wrong. I also pumped in on-call rooms, which were tended to be shared spaces that you really couldn't lock. And it didn't matter how many times you put a sign on the door, you always got walked in on. You could do a back office, but again, people walk in there all the time. You could be in a patient room, but again, COVID times have inserted a whole other layer of complexity for pumping moms. But I've also pumped in my car on the way to work, on the way home from work, because I knew I probably wasn't going to have time on my single coverage overnight shift to actually pump. And thankfully, the technology has improved. And so now they're much better wearables, but that wasn't the case in my situation. It was a total Madonna, like cones out to here ridiculousness. So there are some policy statements that are out there to support us. And so ASAP has put out a policy statement, which you can scan this QR code and read a little bit more about that. But I think it's also important to understand, if you could go to the next slide, please. Part of our opportunities that come up are dependent on our capacity to network. And so if we're going to organizations or we're going to meetings, there have to be childcare options. And so, yes, ASAP is doing a better job, and SAM is doing a better job, and FEMM is doing a better job of at least thinking about this and creating opportunities for childcare, but it didn't really exist when I was, in the early phases.
Thank you, Dr. Ogle. That was amazing. I wish this information was around when I was a resident. I'm now going to hand it over to Dr. Neha Rauker to talk about some strategies that junior faculty can utilize.
Thank you, Dr. Mishkin. So as you can see from exploring these policies and listening to these stories, there's pros and cons from having a baby at different times during your life and during your career. As you heard from Dr. Lal, as a new faculty member, you're trying to make a good impression in a department if you go someplace new, or if you stay someplace where you trained, you're trying to gain traction as a faculty member and be seen as a faculty member. And either way, you've got serious skin in the game. And in the first couple of months of your new career, you've spent time saying yes to everything that appears on your desk. So now you're overbooked. You may have found, or you may be involved in networking to develop your niche. You may have started projects, and then all of a sudden you're pregnant. So maternity leave as a new faculty member, the guilt is real. Projects may have to be put on hold, although a lot of my colleagues said, well, you're home for 3 months or 2 months, you can get a lot done. Really? So it just depends on how you balance your time. But the literature has repeatedly shown that those who bear children when they are faculty, it delays their academic promotion trajectory, right? It contributes to this famous leaky pipeline, and it's led to newer terms like the sticky floor, where in addition to finding that fewer women than men are being promoted, they also find that women early in their careers are given fewer institutional resources. So that's why it's called the sticky floor. They just can't get over it. So let's look at, next slide? Oh, here we are. So let's look at schedule accommodations first. So for me, I was a junior faculty member, married to an orthopedic surgeon with a new chair like Dr. Lal in a department that had not seen a pregnant faculty member in years. And so when I returned to the ED, and in full disclosure, I went back to my sports medicine practice long before I came back to the ED, there were a variety of issues I needed to immediately problem solve. So there are institutional resources, and I encourage all of you to find out what they are before you go out on leave. I want to give you a couple of tips to navigate some of the bigger problems of being a new mom and being a junior faculty member. The first is your schedule. Next slide, please. So first is your schedule. So residents have the option, perhaps, of stacking electives, and feel free to get very creative with this. When I was a new faculty member, I sort of learned the tricks and could guide my residents on different options for lighter schedules or working from home, doing electives from home and meeting with me with their child once a week so we could go over what they've learned. But then what? As a new faculty member, we look for solutions that are long-standing, seriously, and so you should seriously consider night shift work because daycares somehow are only open during the day. And so they're not helpful when you have an evening shift or if your husband's on call and you're on a night shift. It's really not helpful. So another option is a templated schedule, which allows for nanny sharing. And we also offered night sharing. And each of them has pros and cons, but each is really worth exploring. Next slide, please. Outsource. You will learn, as Dr. Lal said, hopefully quickly, you can outsource everything. Nothing cannot be outsourced. So we think about childcare, and this is our nanny with my 2 daughters. But grocery shopping, it's so easy now with apps. Laundry. So my dear husband thought laundry meant washing the clothes and then putting the clean clothes in a big, big pile in my room. It didn't mean folding or putting them away or anything. And so I was at the mall with my kids, and the girl at the Gap, she was doing such a great job folding. I hired her on the spot, and I paid her more than the Gap was giving her, and she worked for me to fold and do my clothes. And so be creative. Nothing can't be outsourced. Errands, house cleaning, and especially outside work. Next slide, please. So let me talk a little bit about multitasking. If you're going to bond with your baby, bond with your baby. If you're going to bond with your spouse, bond with your partner, just bond with them. Don't think that you are engaged while you're doing other things. And don't bring the bad habits we learn in emergency medicine, like letting people interrupt us all day long. Don't bring that home. So let's look at the science for a second of why multitasking is not efficient. So the first task, multitasking leads to a drop in as much as 40% of productivity. So it's actually not efficient. Next slide, please. The human brain can't handle more than one task at a time. We think it can, but you know, if you're looking at a complex EKG, it takes a few minutes to get back to your note and get back in the groove. So what we're doing is task switching, and we can't do that as quickly as we think we can. Next slide, please. Only 2.5% of the population actually multitasks well. And it takes 15 minutes to get back into the intense mental tasks once you're interrupted. So we know this, right, from our EKGs. Next slide, please. So the shortest way to do many things is to do one thing at a time. People who are interrupted take 50% longer to complete a task. Next slide, please. So if you think you're good at multitasking, research actually shows 2% of the population is actually good at juggling tasks without letting the balls drop. The rest of us think we're keeping all the balls in the air, but we're really not. So super taskers, is 2% of the population, do things just differently. And the best way to remember to do everything is to write them all down. So there's this old adage, a dull pencil is greater than the sharpest memory. And then focus on one task at a time. So I'm going to ask that you stop multitasking when you're at home, especially. So how do you do that? Next slide, please. Batch your tasks, group your like work together, have specific times of the day to read and answer emails. That's key, right? Because we'd love to look at our phone and scroll through our email, and then schedule things instead of answering the phone when it rings. Go ahead, next slide here. This is an important concept in this day of getting notified every time somebody posts a new Instagram picture, or every time you get a voicemail, my phone buzzes. Actually seek the information out instead of it being brought to you. That way you're not distracted all day. Next slide, please. It's important to learn when you function best, because when you're tired all the time, as you will be as a new parent, you'll need to know when your foggy mind is sharpest. An interesting survey found actually that the early bird does catch the worm. The proverb exists for a reason. Only 10% of early birds feel overworked, while 27% of night owls feel overworked all the time. So just look at your schedule, learn about yourself before this baby comes into your life. Next slide, please. Beware the bewitching hour, the time between about 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. when your baby is completely crazy, no matter who you are. It is a cranky time of the day. It's not a myth. You have to be prepared for it. Next slide, please. Delegate. There's flow charts all over the internet about when to delegate and who to delegate. And it can be done effectively, but it can also be done to improve your relationships and build collaborative networks. If somebody's asking you to do something and you really don't have the time to do it, bring somebody more junior than you up. Recommend them and then credit them. And this helps build your network. Set deadlines. That productivity study I mentioned found that 50% of people feel that deadlines mobilize their skills. So if your boss says there's no deadline, make one for yourself and stick to it. Because if you don't start it, it's never going to get done. You're not a machine. You're not designed to go, go, go. You need to take a break and take care of yourself. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Rauger. That was great. That was great advice. I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Melissa Parsons, who's going to talk a little bit about how to optimize things when you return to work from leave.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And can you go to the next slide, please? Awesome. So this was June 8th. It was my first day back to work in 2020. And it was also the first time that my baby smiled at me. So that was that morning before I was supposed to leave to go to my first shift. And I think one of the really important things for us to know is that in the United States, if we take that full 3 months of maternity or family leave that we're given, we go back to work basically the same time that our babies become little humans. And when they first really start to interact with us and want to smile at us and coo at us and love us back, even though we've been loving them and not sleeping at all for 3 straight months. So unfortunately, that's when we're going to get ready to head back to the hospital or the office. Next slide, please. So as we get ready to do that, it's really important to figure out the logistics for your family and then to remember to take care of yourself. When I say logistics, what do I mean by that? Well, can you go back one? Are you going to be pumping? When will you pump? How are you going to get milk home to and from your baby as you need it? Who's going to take care of your child, right? My husband's a firefighter. He works 24-hour shifts. I work crazy shifts in the emergency department, as do all of you, right? So for the first 6 months of this baby's life, one of us was always going, one of us was always coming, and we were never both at home at the same time, which probably wasn't the ideal logistics. And then really simple things that you won't think of, like what scrubs actually fit you again at the 3-month mark when you're trying to go back to the hospital, because I tried on a bunch of mine. I was like, oh, none of these fit. This is great. I shouldn't have given back all of the ones that I had used when I was pregnant. And then taking care of yourself, right? You still may not feel your best, look your best. You may not be sleeping. Not fitting into scrubs is annoying to me, right? So that it's not ideal. And then there's a lot of emotions that go into going back to work. And we're going to talk about that for a little bit. So the first big one that I hear basically every woman talk about is guilt, right? And there's a million reasons why women feel guilty. Some women feel guilty for leaving their baby. Some women feel guilty because they enjoy going back to work. I went back to work in the middle of this pandemic, and it was the first time that I was getting to talk to adults in 90 days, basically. And I have to be honest, I was ecstatic. I loved going to work every day. I felt very guilty that I was so happy to leave my child, but I got to see humans again, even with masks, because it was better than being stuck in my house. So it was awesome, right? But there's a lot of guilt. And so I find that women, everybody's kind of shooting all over themselves of how they should feel, what they should be doing, right? But you're doing amazing things. You're saving lives at the hospital and you're keeping a small human alive at home. And to be able to do both of those at the same time is pretty much superhero. And then the next big thing is imposter syndrome. So coming back to work is hard, and imposter syndrome is super real. Like, we struggle with that regularly, but when you've been out of work for 3 months and all of a sudden you're coming back and you're like, hey, what's going on? Or if you're in my shoes and there's an entirely new disease process that was created while you were out for 3 months and you know nothing, you've been listening to all the podcasts on it while you're out, but you haven't seen a single COVID patient yet. And you're like, oh, what do I do? What's our policy? I have no idea. Right. I was asking colleagues, like, did something change while I was gone? Do we do this now for like GI bleeds? And they're laughing at me like, no, Parsons, you still know what you're doing. So those are 2 big emotional things. But when we talk about being superhero, I think one of the few moments in my postpartum period where I really was like, I think I might be Superwoman, was running a code on shift while pumping. And it was this really weird, really cool scenario, right? Where now we have these wearable pumps and you actually can do both. You can pump and work if you choose to. And this part is risky because we shouldn't be expected to do both. It should be a choice. I work in a place where it gets a little crazy. There's not a ton of coverage, and it was better for me to be able to pump, walk around, run around. I was able to pump and walk around, run around without sacrificing milk. And so this was what a day at work would look like for me. And I would make milk. I had this entire system to store it. And that was how my life worked. Other people may need to sit for 10 or 20 or 30 minutes in a room by themselves and have that time to be able to pump safely. And the one caveat that I tell everybody is set alarms on your phone and do not ever turn them off until you're actually pumping. So my alarm in one of our codes went off every 9 minutes for a very long period of time. And everybody was like, can I turn that off? And I was like, no, it would just snooze, and we would snooze it again and again so that I made sure that I actually got to pump. So if I'm going to cut short a little bit just so that we can get to Dr. Mannix. But if you're looking for a great reference, that last book is called the 5th trimester, and it's a really good reference on going back to work.
Thank you. And, so, we have so much information, so we want to make sure we get Dr. Lexi Mannix's talk in as well, because she has a very important topic that this is not just for mom and kids. So go ahead, Dr. Mannix.
Thank you both. So I'm really excited to be a part of this discussion because we've heard from some really amazing women, all of whom shared some of their experiences as a mother, and I am not a mother. And what I'm here to talk about today is that this isn't just about moms. And I'm going to start by sharing with you this quote on here. You don't have a family. And I have heard this or a similar phrase more times than I can count. From men, from women who support me and my life decisions, from women at this very conference. And sometimes they're talking about themselves, and sometimes they're saying it in kind of a jealous way. And sometimes it's about picking up an extra shift, or working Christmas or Mother's Day, or why I work and where I work there, and the reasons I should be able to attend a meeting at a certain time. And my response to this is always, I have a family, I don't have children. And these people here are some of my family. And what I wanted to discuss is like, what is a family? And it's sometimes a group of people who share a legal or biologic bond, but sometimes it's more than that. It's not just the people you're related to. And the people in these photos are my sister and my brother and my parents and my nephew and my partner and my dog, who is the closest thing I have to a child. And for me, this is what my family looks like. And it may look different than yours, but it's still my family. And so Dr. Parsons saw my slides and she wanted me to pull this picture in indirectly. But what I think is important to hear is sometimes family is the people we choose. Sometimes it's the people you meet at 26 who you didn't grow up with your whole life, but they become your family and you're as ingrained in their family life as they are in yours, even though you met them later in your life. And sometimes it looks crazy. And what's important here, and why I really want to talk about this, is because while I am not a mother, I am still a caregiver in my family. And the majority of caregivers in this country and in this world are women. And actually, most of the caring that goes on is for adults, whether it's for our significant other or our parents or our adult children or our in-laws or our neighbors or our siblings. But the majority of care is actually to adults. And what I think is important about all of this is thinking about that whole maternity leave concept and really kind of reframing it into more of a family leave. And not only does that help destigmatize women who take maternity leave, but also destigmatizes women like myself, who are still expected to be a caregiver in my family, even though I'm not biologically a parent. So what I wanted you to take home from this portion of our talk about this not just being for moms is that the language does matter. And if you could go back a slide, the language that you choose, whether you're talking about family leave or what a family looks like. And I also want to stress how important it is to support each other's life choices. In the same way I support my female and male colleagues who choose to have children, I hope that they support me in my decision to not have children. And that it's not just maternity leave, it really is family leave. We need to think about the way that we phrase that.
So, thank you, Dr. Mannix. That's an excellent point. And I wanted to I think we're just at time, and I hope you didn't feel cut off at the end there, because I certainly think we need to drive that home. But on this QR code, we have our references, and we have everybody's email here if anybody would like to contact us. For the moderators, I'm not sure if we have a couple of minutes because we finished just on time, but I'm sure the panel would be happy to take any questions. Stop sharing there. Okay. This is the awkward Zoom silence, so feel free to break it.
Just, yeah, I think you guys are watching the chat. Nothing in the chat, particularly for questions, just what we want you guys to know. But you do have a few minutes if people have questions.
Okay.
We don't bite, we promise.
set if anybody wanted to ask anything. I don't want to put people on the spot, but this is a very personal choice for everyone. And so please feel free to reach out. Everybody on this panel is certainly willing to talk and share their stories and share their advice. So we'll stay on for another minute if anybody wants to ask any last minute questions. Otherwise, we'll let you go to your other didactics. Thank you very much for attending. And Lexi, thank you for rushing through. It's amazing how quick the time goes. And Melissa, thank you. Can any of you share experiences with supporting people that are struggling with fertility? Yes. Yes, that's a great question. Does anybody in particular want to answer that one?
I will. So I guess it depends on what you're looking for as far as supporting people struggling with fertility. One of the big things I think that we can do is adjusting scheduling. So I spent 3 years doing IVF to have my baby. And I found that one of the big things my IVF group wanted was for me not to do night shifts when I was going into an IVF cycle, to try to get my hormones as normal as possible. So that was something my group actually worked with me on as far as my schedule. So I would block night shifts like way in advance or way behind any cycle that I went through. And that was super helpful. And then also decreasing, a lot of groups are looking at like scheduling around really early pregnancy too, right? Because fertility also goes into that first trimester, and can you get through the first trimester safely? And so trying to decrease night shifts and shift switching during that first trimester hypothetically may improve chances. But also, being open to people in your group who may be trying to get pregnant that aren't the questions that we ask, how we say it. It's kind of the language thing that Lexi talked about, right? Of, are you ever going to have a kid? Do you ever want children? And that person may have been trying for years at that point and you have no idea. I had an ectopic while I was trying, and actually ended up being a patient at our facility. So, I've talked a lot about it. I'm happy to talk to you, Alex, if you have any questions and you want to tag me after this, but yeah, certainly important and something we discussed in our last talk too.
Yeah, and I can certainly offer my support in this as well. Like Melissa, we went through fertility treatments for about 3 years as well. And granted, I no longer work on the floor in the emergency department, but I was able to secure intermittent FMLA to help me be able to rearrange my schedule to support those treatments and the appointments that you're going to have, because it's a lot of appointments and you have to make accommodations for that. And there is also some protection and coverage out there through FMLA for cases like that as well. So if you have any questions or need any support, I'm also a resource as well.
Yeah, and I think the big thing too from like the leadership side is it can be very hard to be open about these struggles like with your boss. But unfortunately, like if your boss doesn't know, like they can't help you. Mm-hmm. So, while certainly, we want to really respect everybody's privacy. And I can tell you in our group right now, well, Alex, we have 5 people out on FMLA, and I bet the majority of the group doesn't know who they are and nobody knows why they're out. So, it's really, it is important to be open with your chair and like the head of HR so that they can really help you work through compensated time off, FMLA, just completely pull you from the schedule and send them out to the group who can pick these up, right? Because that isn't something you need to be worrying about, but that does take a lot of trust to have that conversation, like with your division director, your department chair, whoever it might be.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, for me, I did not talk directly with my chair, even though he is my direct manager. I communicated with his assistant, who I had a good relationship with, and she would kind of parlay certain information to him so that I did have a safe space and somebody to communicate openly with, but not necessarily with my chair because it was a really sensitive and difficult situation. And so it is hard to find the correct people to give enough information to let them help you. So you can maybe find somebody, in your institution that could help, communicate the information without you necessarily having to be the one to communicate that information.
Doesn't FMLA protect the time to go to your appointments as well? There's something called intermittent FMLA that you can use.
Yes, it does. And the same requirements, fall into that. That 12-week period can cover your continuous leave after your maternity leave, and it can also cover your appointments prior to. Because for me, in my case, I did have intermittent FMLA to get me through my treatments. So when it came time for me to have my son, I was actually only able to take 10 weeks of maternity leave off because I had already used 2 weeks of time to get to my appointments and to readjust my schedule for other things that I needed to get to that point. So FMLA does also cover that too, because it's a medical leave. It's a medical condition. I actually had, some like minor surgeries that I had to go through for it as well. And so that did protect me.
It's a great question. Are there any other questions?
So I noticed a comment in the chat from Alex about the rephrasing seems a lot like the crushed curb phenomenon from disability advocacy. I'm ignorant to this, so I would love to hear more about that.
So my partner is disabled, and so he's really into the disability world. And I actually went to the session at SAEM about sort of disability conversations. And one of the kind of neat little nuggets that I took home from it was that as part of the ADA, there was the stipulation that we needed to start crushing curbs so that like particularly at crosswalks and sidewalks and stuff, so that people in wheelchairs had increased access. And one of the unanticipated but positive side effects of that is that now all these parents that were trying to get their kids around in strollers had huge amounts or had this huge increase in their accessibility of where they could get to easily and sort of the struggles with that. And so this kind of rephrasing of from maternal leave to family leave, and then being able to take that expansion of verbiage and now say it's not just maternal leave, it's paternal leave, it's adopted parent leave, it is leave to be able to take care of your elderly and ill family members. That there are sort of these positive side effects of that shift, I guess is the point I was trying to make.
Thanks for sharing that, Alex. I didn't know about that either.
Thank you everyone so much for coming. I've got to run.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Out of respect for your time, it's 4 o'clock. Please feel free to reach out, and thank you. Enjoy the rest of SAEM.
Thank you. Take care.
You.
Bye.